I got off work a little after 11 p.m., exhausted in that dull, heavy way that settles in after a long shift. My house was about 45 minutes outside the city, tucked away in a quiet rural area, so the drive home always felt like a slow transition from noise to silence. Once I left the city lights behind, the roads emptied out completely. No traffic, no street noise. Just darkness, trees, and the low hum of my engine. I usually enjoyed those drives. They gave me time to think, to decompress, to let the stress of the day fade away. About 20 minutes from home, I turned onto the same narrow side road I'd taken hundreds of times before. It led almost directly to my house, winding gently through dense forest on both sides. At night, the place felt isolated, almost forgotten. The road lights were spaced far apart and barely did their job, leaving long stretches of darkness between them. That night, fog had rolled in thicker than usual. It clung low to the ground, swallowing the road ahead until I could only see a few car lengths in front of me. Still, I wasn't worried. There were no intersections, no sharp turns, and hardly anyone ever used that road so late at night. A few minutes in, something caught my attention. Through the fog ahead, I noticed a faint blinking light. It was small and irregular, like it was flickering on and off. At first, I thought it might be a broken reflector or a bicycle light, but I couldn't tell how far away it was or even which side of the road it was on. My stomach tightened slightly, and I instinctively slowed down. As I got closer, the light suddenly went out. Before I had time to process that, a car emerged straight out of the fog and stopped directly in front of me. I slammed on the brakes, but there wasn't enough distance. My car bumped into the back of theirs with a dull thud. For a few seconds, I just sat there gripping the steering wheel, heart racing, trying to understand how quickly everything had happened. I stepped out of my car and saw that neither vehicle seemed badly damaged. It looked more like a tap than an actual collision. I stood beside my car, waiting for the other driver to get out. Inside their vehicle, I could see movement, but I couldn't tell what they were doing. The car itself looked old and worn down, paint chipped, headlights still turned off. Eventually, the driver's door opened and a man stepped out slowly. He was middle-aged, tall, and heavy-set. Something about him immediately made me uncomfortable. He wouldn't look at me directly. Instead, his eyes kept darting toward the trees and down the road like he was checking for something or someone. Trying to stay calm, I asked if everything was okay and mentioned how suddenly he'd pulled out. He didn't answer right away. After a few seconds, he muttered an apology, his voice flat and distant. The silence felt wrong. The fog, the empty road, the way he stood there avoiding eye contact, it all set off alarms in my head. I told him there didn't seem to be any real damage and that I was just going to head home. As I reached for my car door, he suddenly told me to wait. He said he wanted to check his car for damage before I left. Not wanting to escalate the situation, I agreed and stood by my car while he walked to the back bumper. That's when things got strange. Instead of just checking the rear, he started walking slowly around the entire car, inspecting the sides and even the front, despite the fact that I had only hit his back bumper. My uneasiness turned into fear. As he reached the passenger side, I glanced through the fog toward his car, and my blood ran cold. A large figure suddenly sat upright in the back seat. The door opened, and another man began to step out. I didn't hesitate. I jumped into my car, slammed the door shut, and locked it just as the second man fully exited the vehicle. Both of them started waving their arms, shouting for me to stop. Panic flooded my body. I threw the car into drive, swerved around them, and sped down the road. In my rearview mirror, I saw their headlights snap on, cutting through the fog behind me. They followed me for what felt like forever, though it was probably only half a minute. Then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, the lights faded and disappeared into the darkness. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I pulled into a brightly lit gas station a few minutes away and parked near the entrance. I sat there shaking, watching the road, waiting to see if that car would pass by. It never did. After about 50 minutes, I finally drove home, locking my doors the moment I got inside. I didn't call the police. At the time, I wasn't even sure how to explain what had happened. Nothing was technically damaged, no crime had occurred, but deep down I knew something was wrong about that night. Even now, I still think about it, about the blinking light, about the second man in the back seat, and about how close I might have come to something far worse if I'd stayed outside my car just a few seconds longer. I was working as a driver for a small trucking company that delivered frozen goods across several states. Most routes were manageable, 3 or 4 stops, then back to the warehouse and home, but every now and then I'd get assigned a long haul that couldn't be finished in a single day. On those nights, I'd usually pull into a truck stop, sleep for a few hours in the cab, and continue driving in the morning. It was routine, something I'd done dozens of times without incident. That particular day started normally. I left early, completed the delivery without any problems, and began the long drive back late at night. By the time it was around 1 a.m., the road was nearly empty. The sky was pitch black, the kind of darkness where even the stars feel distant, and the highway stretched out endlessly in front of me. I was exhausted, fighting that foggy mental state that comes from staring at the same strip of road for hours. I told myself I'd stop at the next truck stop and rest for an hour or two before pushing on. The last sign I passed said the next rest area was 40 miles ahead. I remember zoning out for a bit, my mind drifting, when something suddenly caught my attention in the side mirror. At first, it was just a faint flicker of light. I leaned forward slightly, squinting, and realized there were headlights directly behind my trailer. What was strange was that I couldn't see the car itself, just the glow of the lights. That meant whoever it was riding extremely close, right in my blind spot. I slowed down a little, expecting them to change lanes and pass. They didn't. I sped up slightly, still nothing. The car stayed glued to the back of my trailer, so close that if I had to brake suddenly, they would have slammed straight into me. That alone made me uneasy, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were distracted. Maybe they didn't realize how close they were. When I finally saw the sign for the truck stop, I felt relieved. I put my signal on and started to turn in. In my mirror, I watched the headlights slow down for a moment and then follow me off the highway. That's when the uneasiness turned into something heavier. I pulled into the parking lot and chose an open spot away from most of the other trucks. The car followed me the entire way, rolling slowly behind me until I parked. It stopped directly behind the trailer, so close that, once again, I couldn't see it at all from the driver's seat. I sat there for a few seconds, debating what to do. I told myself maybe I had accidentally cut them off miles back and they were just angry. Road rage wasn't exactly rare in my line of work. Still, something about the way they'd followed me in silence felt different. Finally, I opened the door and stepped down from the cab, intending to ask what the problem was. The moment my door slammed shut, the car suddenly jerked backward, threw itself into reverse, and sped away across the lot. I barely caught a glimpse of it, a white, heavily rusted vehicle driven by what looked like an older man. The car reminded me of an old, decommissioned police cruiser, complete with front bumper bars. I stood there for a minute, listening to the distant sound of the engine fade away, my heart pounding. After double-checking the locks on the trailer and cab, I climbed back inside and shut everything down. I looked out each window carefully, making sure the car hadn't circled back. Eventually, exhaustion won out. I leaned back and closed my eyes. I don't know how long I slept, but I was jolted awake by a loud metallic bang echoing through the trailer. My heart jumped into my throat. I checked the time, just after 3 a.m. Before I could calm myself, there was another bang, even louder this time. I slowly sat up and looked into the side mirror. In the dim light of the lot, I saw a faint shadow moving near the back of the trailer. Fear hit me all at once. I grabbed the small knife I kept in the center compartment and carefully opened the driver's door, making sure it didn't creak. I stepped down quietly and crouched as I moved toward the rear of the truck. When I reached the back, I lowered myself enough to look underneath the trailer. Someone was standing right up against the back doors. Their car was parked directly behind the trailer, headlights off, engine silent. For a split second, my mind went completely blank. Then instinct took over. I shouted as loud as I could, my voice shaking. The figure jumped, spun around, and sprinted back to the car. Seconds later, the engine roared to life, and the vehicle sped out of the lot and disappeared into the night. When I checked the back doors, my hands started to tremble. There were deep scratches around the lock and fresh marks where someone had clearly tried to pry or cut it open. The trailer was empty. I had already completed my delivery. That didn't matter to whoever was back there. I didn't sleep again that night. I got back on the road and drove straight home, checking my mirrors constantly. Nothing else happened, but the feeling never fully went away. Even now, years later, I still get uneasy when a car rides too close behind me in the dark, because I know how quiet and calculated that night felt, and how easily it could have ended much worse. The night this happened, I was leaving a concert on the south side of Chicago with a few close friends. We all knew the area had a rough reputation, but the tickets were cheap, the venue was packed, and we figured staying together would be enough to stay safe. The show itself was incredible, loud, crowded, and energizing, but by the time it ended, the mood shifted. It was close to 10 p.m. And the moment we pulled out of the parking lot, we realized getting home wasn't going to be easy. Traffic was completely backed up. Cars barely moved, inching forward every few minutes. After sitting in almost the exact same spot for half an hour, frustration started to replace the excitement we'd had just minutes earlier. One of my friends pulled out his phone and started searching for alternate routes. Eventually, he found what looked like a shortcut through nearby neighborhood streets that should lead us back to a main road and from there the highway. Against my better judgment, I took the turn. At first, it didn't seem that bad. The streets were narrow, lined with small houses close together, and surprisingly, there were a lot of people outside for that time of night. Some were sitting on porches, others standing in yards or near street corners. That alone felt strange to us, since where we lived, neighborhoods were usually dead quiet by that hour. As we drove deeper, something started to feel off. People weren't just outside, they were watching us. Heads turned as we passed. Conversations stopped. Eyes followed the car. And then one of my friends pointed out something that made my chest tighten. We hadn't seen another moving car in a long time. Probably 20 minutes had passed without a single vehicle coming toward us or passing by. The street seemed to loop and twist, and every turn felt more isolating than the last. I asked my friend to check how close we were to a main road. As he scrolled through the map, another friend suddenly told me to slow down. At the end of the street, a car was parked sideways, completely blocking both lanes. I stopped instantly and threw the car into reverse. Without hesitation, I backed up and turned onto the street we had just come from, my heart pounding. We all started talking at once, trying to figure out what was going on. I kept driving, hoping that was just a coincidence. Less than a minute later, it happened again. Another street, another car parked sideways at the end, blocking the road completely. This time I froze. It was too dark to see inside the vehicle. We couldn't tell if anyone was in it or not, and none of us wanted to get close enough to find out. The air inside the car felt thick, heavy with fear. We were trapped in unfamiliar streets, surrounded by people with no clear way out. While we were arguing about what to do next, two men emerged from a house on the side of the street. One of them stayed near the blocking car. The other walked straight toward my driver's side window. He motioned for me to roll it down. My hands were shaking as I cracked it open just an inch. He leaned in slightly, scanning the inside of the car, looking at each of us one by one. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Just trying to get back to the highway," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. He nodded slowly and glanced over his shoulder at the other man, who had started walking toward the passenger side of the car. For a brief moment, everything went quiet. No one spoke, no one moved. Then, without warning, both men grabbed the door handles. They yanked violently, trying to rip them open. Everyone in the car started screaming at once. I slammed the gear into reverse and floored it. As the car lurched backward, the man at my window shoved his arm through the small opening, trying to reach inside. His arm got stuck for a split second, scraping against the glass before he lost his grip and fell hard onto the pavement. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I spun the car around and sped down the street we'd come from, ignoring stop signs, barely breathing. My entire body was shaking, and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. None of us spoke for a while. We were too stunned to process what had just happened. Eventually, we made it back to a main road and then onto the highway. Only then did I start to slow down. My hands were still trembling on the steering wheel, and my friends kept checking behind us, terrified someone might be following. We all agreed on one thing: if the doors hadn't been locked, that night would have ended very differently. Even now, thinking about how calculated it all felt, the blocked streets, the watching eyes, the perfectly timed approach, still makes my skin crawl. We weren't just lost, we were being set up. And the fact that we got away feels less like luck and more like a narrow escape from something much worse.